but I wasn't early enough. It was $15.50, 10% of the cost of Amtrak. And Megabus has free Wi-Fi, Amtrak has free no-fi. So I was productive all the way down, emailing and surfing the web and so on. And I saw some people downloading porn, but that probably wasn't too common.
I was not on the bus.
And we arrived about 85 minutes later than I would have arrived if I had taken Amtrak. So I saved more than $1 a minute, and the Megabus station, which is right here, this is the station, that's how it's so cheap, was 2 blocks from my office in Washington, D.C., and Amtrak was a couple of miles away. So Megabus was far better, and if you think about it, when are you going to ride the high-speed train? Only on 2 conditions. One is you're so super rich you don't care about the cost, and the other is somebody else is paying for it. And they say, well, high-speed trains are going to be able to compete against planes. You know, Obama says, well, the French and the Chinese have trains that are faster than ours, so we have to catch up. Well, if they had horses and buggies faster than ours, would he spend billions of dollars on a buggy whip race to have higher tech buggy whips? The reality is, we've already caught up. We have this newfangled device called a jet airplane that can go twice as fast as any high-speed train in the world. But they say high-speed trains make sense if you're going from downtown to downtown. You can compete against the airlines. But less than 8% of Americans live downtown or work downtown. Less than 8%. So very few people are going to benefit. And who's that 8%? They're lawyers, bankers, and government bureaucrats. They're the ones who are going to ride the high-speed trains, and you're the ones who are going to be subsidizing it. Now, we don't have to take my word for it. Look at France. France, the average resident of France, they've got hundreds of miles of high-speed trains, the most extensive high-speed rail network in Europe. The average resident of France rides at 397 miles a year. They ride the bus more than they ride high-speed trains. They fly 3 times as much as they ride high-speed trains, and they drive 20 times as much as they ride high-speed trains. Well, how about Japan? Japan has such high-density population, you'd think they'd be all over high-speed trains. 399 miles a year per capita. 2 miles more than France. They ride low-speed trains 2.5 times as much as they ride high-speed trains, because the high-speed trains cost a lot more. China just opened up a high-speed train. Cost is 5 times as much as a conventional train. So even in Japan, they drive a heck of a lot more, almost 10 times as much as they take high-speed trains. Here's Obama's original high-speed rail plan. He was going to call for 200-mile-an-hour trains in California, 150-mile-an-hour trains in Florida, and everywhere else they were going to run Amtrak trains on the existing freight lines a little bit faster than they go today. Top speed of somewhere between 90 and 110 miles an hour, average speed of about 65 or 70 miles an hour. Today the average speed is about 45 miles an hour of Amtrak trains. So they're going to punch up Amtrak trains from 45 to 65 miles an hour. Oh boy, are you going to get out of your car and ride the train because it's going 20 miles an hour faster? I don't think so. Especially since it's still going to be prone to delays, just like the trains are today, because they're going to be running in interference with freight trains and so on. These red lines are the high-speed lines, the gray lines are the conventional Amtrak lines, and that was the original proposal. The problem is, whenever you start doing something like this, you end up with, you call it budget creep. You end up making more and more lines because there's political pressure to build more. Colorado, Denver, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Tucson formed a coalition to lobby for high-speed trains in the Rocky Mountains because they didn't have any. Here's what the map looks like today. We've got Phoenix to Tucson, we've got Las Vegas, we've got Cheyenne to El Paso, we have Minneapolis to Duluth. That's probably the most important high-speed train on this map. You know why? Because the chairman of the House Transportation Committee is from Duluth. And when the chairman of the House Transportation Committee is from Fargo, North Dakota, there's going to be a line on this map from Fargo to Minneapolis. And when the chairman is from Billings, Montana, there'll be a line from Fargo to Billings. And we're going to be building high-speed trains everywhere for nothing. Look what happened in Japan. They built one high-speed rail line that made sense, Tokyo to Osaka. It actually made money. And every other one after that lost money because they just built it to more and more remote places that people didn't want to go, and they got more and more expensive. And by 1987, the Japanese National Railways was $350 billion in debt. General Motors went bankrupt when it was $35 billion in debt. And they sold the high-speed rail, it was a government-owned railroad. They sold the high-speed rail lines to private operators at a half penny on the dollar. That's how valuable they were. And then they had a huge market failure, a huge credit crisis, and their economy went in the tank. And what was their response? Let's stimulate the economy by building more high-speed rail. They've been doing that for 20 years, and you know what they call it? The lost decades. The United States is going to have some lost decades if we decide to try to get out of the current economic crisis by building high-speed rail. We're going to end up with a two-class society. Rich people who live in single-family homes and drive around in their cars and fly around in planes, and everybody else is going to be living in tenements and getting around on transit and low-speed, moderate-speed rail. But I'm here to tell you that the debate we've been having between roads and rail is obsolete. We've been saying instead of building fast tracks, we should build more highways. But it turns out I don't think we need to build more highways. I think we need to make more effective use of the highways we have today. Now there's a lot of ways we can do this, but I'm just going to jump right in to my ultimate conclusion, and that is the next transportation revolution is going to be driverless automobiles. Automobiles that can steer themselves, accelerate themselves, brake themselves, guide themselves, do everything you do as a driver without your help. The idea of driverless cars was actually first conceived of by this man, Norman Bell Geddes, who was a theater set designer in the 1920s and 30s. And he decided he was bored with designing theater sets, so he decided to become a futurist. And he went to different companies and said, will you buy my futuristic designs? And Shell Oil paid him a little money, and Goodyear Tire paid him a little money. Then he went to General Motors and he said, I've got this fantastic idea of what the future is going to be like in the United States. And so he talked General Motors into putting his ideas on display in an exhibit at the 1939 World's Fair called Futurama. It was the most popular exhibit at the fair. 5 million people went to see it. You got in these little chairs, and the chairs moved around, and you looked down at this huge diorama with thousands and thousands of buildings and farms and bridges and highways and so on. It included big cities with giant downtowns and edge cities. This was his vision of what America was going to look like in 1960. And then you had lots of farms, and everything was connected by these gleaming limited access highways. Now, there were very few limited access highways in 1939. If you wanted to go from New York to Pennsylvania or anywhere else just about, you had to take roads that had stoplights, stop signs, all kinds of congestion and things like that. So he conceived of this interstate limited access highway system, and by 1960 we were building the interstate highway system, and people thought we're fulfilling Norman Bell Geddes' dream. But it turns out we were only fulfilling half his dream, because what he promised was that by 1960, oops, need that audio. By 1960, you would be able to get in your car and go coast to coast in 24 hours, and your car would drive itself the whole way. And the benefits of this driverless system would be enormous. And he projected we'd have a huge increase in highway capacities. Right now, freeway lane can safely move about 2,000 vehicles per hour in free-flowing traffic. With driverless cars, we can increase that to 6,000 to 8,000 vehicles per hour. Suddenly we've got 3 to 4 times as much road capacity as we had before. We don't need to build any more roads.